Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, this is the Ask Academy. We are the STEM Innovation. And today, what we're going to be looking at is the midpoint formula, but then we're also going to be looking at the distance formula. And so we're going to look at a couple of those ways of being able to look at those formulas and be able to use them mathematically. These are two formulas that you're for sure going to see on the ACT and SATs. Formulas are really pretty easy for the midpoint. Midpoint formula has you look at a couple look at a line segment, and that line segment's going to have some coordinates. It's going to have an x coordinate and a y coordinate. On the other end, it's going to have another x and y coordinate. To find the midpoint of that particular line segment means that I want to find the coordinate, what is the x and y positioning of the point that's right smack dab in the middle that we would call the midpoint. That coordinate. We need the x and y coordinate. Well, let me ask you quickly, when you're averaging two grades and they have equal weight, how do you do that? To know what grade you have. That's right. You add the grades together and divide by how many there are, and that's 2. Well, the midpoint formula is really simply that. It's an average of coordinates. So if you can just remember that, to find the midpoint, you're simply going to average the x's to the x's and the y to the y. So again, there's 2 of those. And so the formula itself says that what I'm going to do to find that coordinate is I'm going to add the x's together and divide by how many they are. I'm going to average them. And then I'm going to add the y coordinates together, whatever they happen to be, and then I'm going to average those again by dividing by 2. So that's the midpoint formula. And we're going to be using that. Let's say that this was a coordinate, this point was 7, 4, and this coordinate was 1, 3. What I would do is average those together. So again, I'm going to look at the x's, the 7 and the 1, the 7 and the 1, and I'm going to add those together, and then I'm going to divide by 2. I would look at the y's, the 4 and the 3, and I would add those together and divide by 2, and that's how I use the formula. And I'm going to add it, then just do the arithmetic. Simplifying where you can. You can change that to decimal if you wish to get a better view of where it is on the number line. And that's 3.5. So this is the coordinate for that midpoint if it were on this line segment and with those coordinates. So that's the midpoint formula. The other formula for today is called the distance formula. The distance formula we're going to look at. And that formula is asking not really what the coordinates or what points are that they want you to find, but it's asking if I have a line segment, then what's the length of that line segment? What's the distance of that line segment? So what it's based off of is Pythagorean's theorem, which again, if we drop a vertical and a horizontal from those 2 points, we end up with what we call a right triangle. And the right triangle formula for Pythagorean's theorem says that if I take that hypotenuse side, that side squared is equal to the sum of the square of the other 2 sides, regardless of what that right triangle looks like or how big it is. So the length of that hypotenuse, the c, is the square root of the sum of the sums of the squares of those 2 legs, we call it, in the right triangle. So if we apply that to a line segment that has coordinates, x and y and x and y, if we apply it that way to those things, then what that says is this: how do we determine what the length of this vertical leg is of that right triangle? Well, the coordinates that determine verticalness are the y's. So how do I know what the length of that is? It is the difference between those two. So I'm going to take that distance formula and apply it, applying Pythagorean's theorem to the distance formula. I'm going to subtract, and how do I know what? I'm going to subtract the y's, and then plug that in for to determine the length of this B side. This A side, or this horizontal side of the right triangle, is the right and left change length. Well, that's determined by the x coordinates. So again, how do I find the difference between those two? I subtract. And so that's going to how I'm going to find the A length and get a number for that. And so all I'm going to do is just plug those things in. How do I find A? I'm going to subtract the x coordinates. Now listen to me. It doesn't matter what direction. It doesn't matter how you subtract, which direction, which coordinate you subtract from the other. Because you're going to get the same value, absolutely, an absolute value. And then you're just going to square that anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I'm going to add that now to finding the difference in the y's, whatever the coordinates might be, and I'm going to square that. I add those two things together, and then I take the square root. So let's use the same coordinate that we had before for the points, that this coordinate had a 7, 4 value, and this coordinate had a 1, 3 value, just like the midpoint formula. But yeah, let's find the length of that particular one. So what I'm going to do is take the x's and not add this time, but subtract. And so I've got the x's. I'm going to subtract 7 minus 1. Subtracting the x's. And then I'm going to subtract the y's, the 4 minus the 3. Plugging those into the values of the formula, and then just doing algebraically now we do the order of operations. We do the steps of the things that we need to look at first. We do parentheses first, we subtract to get 6. Then we're going to square that. We subtract and get 1 and square that. Add the two values together. And the square root of that 37, which is 6 point something approximately, if I take the square root of 37, and I get approximately, I can approximate it, or I can get the exact answer here in radical form of what the distance is. So that's somewhere around 6 units long, a little bit more. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the midpoint formula and the distance formula guarantee the ACT and universities across the nation are going to be interested in, can you work and answer problems about midpoint and distance? We are the Ask Academy.